God has also been very gracious with us, basically just saying, receive my love. Receive the gift I've given you of salvation. You can't earn it. And by the way, you can't start earning it after you receive my salvation. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a very quick look at the history of Israel this morning. Next week, we're going to talk about some very interesting implications in regards to Israel. And I think the third week, next week, will be a little interesting for some. And the next week, even more so for some. I've already put my resume out to a few places. Don't worry, it'll be okay. All right, so some of this is going to seem real basic to some of you, but I think it'll still be helpful to kind of rehearse. And some of you, this will be, wow, new, interesting. So there were 12 sons of Jacob, and those sons became the 12 different tribes that made up the nation of Israel. And as brothers are, they didn't always get along perfectly. So here were the 12 original tribes of Israel: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali. These 12 tribes. And by the way, I'm going to try not to give a lot of explanation. I'm going to try to stay with the notes. I hope this is working. What happened? Now, this is acacia wood from Israel. No. All right. We're trying here. Beautiful. So, Israel, at a certain point, after the death of Solomon, over political, human issues, they literally split as a nation. And there became two distinct parts of Israel. And one kind of retained the name Israel. The other became known as Judah. And there were 10 tribes that rebelled against Solomon's son. How many of you know Solomon had a glorious kingdom? I mean, unbelievable. People came from all over the world and were blown away at what was in his kingdom. And when you read about it, it was amazing. But guess what? I know none of you are going to be able to relate to this. But to have such a fantastic palace, all the things, the wonders of that kingdom, there was one little minor detail. There were a lot of taxes under Solomon. And when his son came to the throne, he took horrible advice from his young friends. He wouldn't listen to the old men, the wise, that said, look, your dad taxed these people to death. If you'll reduce those a little bit, they'll love you. They'll be so loyal to you. And the young men said, no, tax them even more. Show them how strong you are. And so he tried to, and they rebelled. And he lost most of the nation. And they left him and chose another king to be over them. And those two houses of Israel remained separated from that point on. And it was not a very nice thing. So Judah, the southern two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, stayed loyal, and they were a very large group. And from that point on, there was enmity, dislike, even hatred between those two parts of Israel. That did not make God's heart happy. this is just a really simple way. The Mediterranean Sea, Palestine. Have we seen that in the news ever here lately? So the 10 tribes were up in the northern part of Palestine, and the 2 tribes were in the south. And Jerusalem was in the south. And the 10 tribes, the king said, hey, if we let them go down to Jerusalem to worship that God commanded, they're going to get loyal to the king there again. So they chose Samaria as a capital and immediately went into idolatry and started setting up idols and worshiping idols. So I want to show you a really quick timeline of the kings and the prophets and where the books of the Old Testament fall. A lot of people believe that the books in the Bible, the way they're arranged, are in sequential time sequence, and that's not true. Do you know what probably the last book of the Bible that was written in the Old Testament was? Probably Esther. That was under the Persian kingdom after Israel had been gathered again from their Babylonian captivity. But let's look real quick, and this will help some of you get a little better perspective. And we're going to start from the first king of Israel, not when Israel came out of Egypt and became a nation, but once they had their first king, who God didn't want them to have, he wanted to be their king. So Saul was the first king of Israel, and that was from about 1050, round figures, BC, 1,050 years before Christ was born, to about 1011. So Saul ruled for 40 years in Israel. The prophets during that time were basically Samuel was the prophet in Israel during most of that time. And by the way, these are not perfect. The prophets somewhat overlapped, and these things, you can't just tie it down to the month of April in 10,052, but you'll get the general idea. And the books of the Bible being written during this time were Psalms, mostly. So that's during the first kingdom when Saul was king. Then David became king. You remember all the trials that it took to get him to be king. And he reigned from about 1011 to about 971. Again, 40-year reign. Samuel and Nathan were the primary prophets during that time. Remember, Nathan came to David and really confronted him about his sin. Now, the books of the Old Testament that were written roughly during this time were Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, what do you know? Song of Solomon. Solomon wrote those books. Obviously, David wrote many of the Psalms, and that should be in that list. I don't know quite how that... I didn't make this because I am not... Yeah, let's just say I didn't make all of this. But, by the way, do you know what it's called if you steal someone else's work, like their writing or whatever? Do you know what that's called? Plagiarism, right? And it's against the law. You can go to jail, right? But what is it called if you steal 25 people's writing? It's called a bestseller. So... okay, so now, after Solomon died, Jeroboam, Rehoboam, the kingdom got split. And now we see the kings of Israel, Jeroboam, Omri, Ahab. This is when all the lovely things begin to happen. Jezebel, Ahab, wicked kings. The prophets during that time were Gad, when he would come and confront the kings, you know why he was named that? They'd go, ye gads, this is, okay. Anyway, Ahijah was another prophet. These are not real well known, but these were active prophets. And the book basically is 1 Kings. The first 11 chapters give us some of this history, and there were a lot of Psalms written during this time. So, 875 to 841, Ahab, Jehu. The prophets, Elijah and Elisha. This is during a lot of that rich stories that we learned in Sunday school. Elijah, Elisha, all of the different things. And that's in 1 Kings, some of those middle chapters. Isaiah, Micah, Nahum were the prophets prophesying during this time. It was not a real cheerful time in the nation. A lot of horrific things. And I just want to say this. As the nation, even Judah, as well as Israel, began to go into more and more idolatry, Solomon set up idols right in the temple of God, married 1,000 non-Israelite idolatrous wives so he could make political unions with different nations. And they began to go down. But what we see is God is merciful. And he didn't just destroy them immediately. So he started allowing not such great weather. No rain. Crops dying. Hunger. And then he says, I'm the one sending these hordes of locusts that eat up all your food. I'm trying to get your attention. And then he would send a plague, and he'd allow this, and little bits of enemies kind of encroaching, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. By the way, and we're going to see this at the end, but I want to say it now. God's word says in the book of Romans that everything that was written in the Old Testament is for our education. We are to read it, and I was going to start this today by trying to shock you with a bold statement and say, now we know that the Old Testament, because the Old Covenant is outdated, and it is, it's obsolete. The book of Hebrews makes it very clear. And we're going to talk about some of that 2 weeks from now. That may shock some of you. Therefore, the value of the Old Testament really is, there's no value in it because we're in a new covenant. That was an old covenant under totally different rules. So there's, other than historical interest, the Psalms are comforting, but there's really no value to us because we're under the new covenant. That's what many Bible teachers teach their people. And that's a lie. I felt like there was this collective, what happened to him? No, there's great value in the Old Testament. And I'll tell you what else we see. The love and the mercy of God. It's not all rules. There's this powerful mercy and love, and here's who I really am. I am Yahweh. I am the God of mercy. And there is much to learn. During this time, when, spoken bluntly, Israel's going to hell in a handbasket right now at this time, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, and Jeremiah were some of the primary prophets during this time. And that's why you read Jeremiah was weeping, broken. You read Lamentations. How many of you have never read Lamentations? Amazing, powerful book. I mean, it's overwhelming, but it's so powerful. And he's broken by what he sees happening in the nation because he knows what's coming. Can I say this? If you even have a little bit of spiritual light and life, and you look out at our nation, it should cause a tremor to run through us after everything that God has done for us. The light, his gospel, the blessings. But that doesn't sell very well, so it doesn't get spoken about a lot in churches. But we would greatly deceive ourselves if we believe there are no consequences for 100+ million abortions. That is America's offering to Molech. That's what Israel, they offered their own children in the fire. And God said, I hate it. And it's hard to talk about because I've counseled multiple women that have had abortions. And there's so much pain and so much, there's still that weight. And so I'm not talking about it cavalier like, but it's a horrific thing. And we could go right down the list of the things that we see in our nation that are actually terrifying if you understand that God is a great God of mercy, but justice has to also have judgment. Or it's simply, it's like a terrible parent letting their 6-year-old break everything in the house, hit people, and it's like, oh, isn't he cute? No, he's really grotesque. And could I borrow him for a couple of weeks and get him straightened out? That's what everybody else. And so God does not just ignore sin. There are consequences. And we see that very clearly in the Old Testament. Now we're down to 722, and that's when the 10 tribes, the northern house of Israel, were defeated and taken captive by Assyria, scattered all over, destroyed, terrible destruction. The Assyrians were incredibly cruel. It's easy to read the Bible. The Assyrians came down and they attacked. When they would come in and attack and overcome a city or a territory or a nation, first thing they would do is capture the rulers, skin them alive, and hang them up in the public markets to say, don't you even think of messing with us. We have conquered you. It was scary, terrifying. And so when you read it, we can't read it like, oh, and then they did, and they had this battle. Do you know Israel and Judah fought each other, and in one day 150,000 men were killed in a battle? That's 3 times the number that were killed in Vietnam in the entire war. And we can read it like, but this is the history of Israel. The prophets Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Jeremiah. And then finally, in 586, Judah had watched what happened in Israel, how evil they'd become and how God let them be captured, and they wouldn't listen to the prophets. Do you know what the prophets were prophesying in Judah after they watched Israel taken captive? Prosperity. That's exactly what the Hebrew words mean. Prosperity. There's no judgment coming. God loves us. We have a covenant. We're the children of Abraham. Prosperity. And Ezekiel said, you are prophesying lies. The prophets are liars. You're prophesying out of your own heart. And Yahweh says, I haven't spoken to you. And you know what's frightening? And this is happening in the church today, right now, in many places. He told them, you are so deceived now by your lust for money and power, you know, the girls, the gold, and the glory, the 3 G's. That's what usually messes up, and it was the same back there, the 3 G's. And that spirit of control. And he said, you're so deceived now, you are actually believing your own prophecies. You actually think God is the one giving them to you, and you are speaking out of your own heart because I didn't speak to you. And there's a pretty terrifying verse. Yahweh actually says, people are going to come to the prophet to get a word. That's what he says. And he says, you know what's going to happen? I am going to shock them because I'm actually going to speak through the prophet, and they're going to hear my words, and they're going to be terrified because it's not what they expected. You know, when God speaks, there's such a ring of authenticity. Whether it's blessing, correction, whatever it is. And he says, you're having dreams that are deluding you. They're not dreams from me. They're dreams from out of your own lust and desires. So, in 586, Judah was captured, defeated, and wiped out by Babylon. Powerful kingdom. Remember the 3 Hebrew children? Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel. They found themselves in a heathen, frightening nation. Nebuchadnezzar could just say, Claude, I don't like the way you've been acting around me. Put him to death. He had absolute power. And that kingdom was incredible. When you see the things they built and what they conquered. Jeremiah and Ezekiel are pleading with the leaders. Come back to God's word. Turn. And they would mock him. There's one scene that we see that's so overwhelming, and yet it's happening also in the church today, just in a little different way. He comes to the king of Judah, Jeremiah. He's pleading with him, and he brings the scroll of the scriptures. And it says it was wintertime. I don't think God wastes words. And it says the king and leaders were sitting by the fire. And the king took his knife and started cutting out the words of God and throwing them in the fire. That's a hard heart. That's ominous. And so Judah goes into captivity for 70 years. Why was it 70 years? Anybody know? Why? They never once observed the Sabbaths. For 490 years, Greg. The year of Jubilee, thank you. And so 490 years had gone by. They'd ignored it 70 times. And so God said, you're going to be in captivity 1 year for every 7 that you've ignored. You know what's beautiful? I've never heard anybody else teach on this. I'm sure probably many people may have seen it. But one day I was reading and I felt like, wow, that God opened up something so beautiful to me. Do you remember when they asked Jesus? Peter said, how many times am I supposed to forgive my brother if he sins against me? 7 times in a day? What did Jesus say? No, 70 times 7. The exact same numbers of what God had forgiven Israel before he finally. So if you don't like the way I'm preaching this morning, I've still got 489. Have you ever been around some people? Seems like they go through like 68 of those in the first 4 minutes. You're talking with them and you're like, whoa, man, it's not even lunchtime and you're up to 200. None of you, I just mean those other people out there. So what happened after Judah went into captivity for 70 years? First under Babylon, and then Babylon was defeated and captured in one night. If you want to read a fascinating story, now that we have AI, I haven't done this, but go to ChatGPT is one, but do you know what the best, I'm being serious now, the best, most potent, powerful AI system is now? It was named after one of our members. Claude AI. That's why we let him lead service this morning. We're honoring him. Just go in there, I haven't done it, but say, could you provide a link that tells the story of how the Medes and Persians defeated Babylon in one night? It's so fascinating. Babylon, I want to make sure you get your money's worth. They built Babylon, and its walls, I can't remember exactly. They didn't have one wall around the city. They had two walls. And the outer wall, I think at the base, underground, I think, and some of you are going to correct me because you're smarter than I am, but it was like 20 feet thick, I believe. Maybe 15 feet thick. Stone. And it went up 70 feet high, I believe. How are you going to defeat that? But don't answer yet. Then there was a space, fairly long, I don't know how exactly, I used to have it all down. There's another wall, huge, thick. And the Euphrates River ran right through the middle of the city, so you couldn't cause them to not have water, and they grew food in between the two walls. How could you defeat Babylon? And they had bridges that went from one side of the city to the other that were extremely high. No, they weren't too high, but they had, at night, every night, they would pull them up. They were like drawbridges, so no one could swim, maybe an army in the river, and get on the bridges. But that was the night that they had a great feast and a huge party. And they forgot to lift the bridges. They didn't forget. People were going back and forth partying all night in Babylon. And the Medes and Persians diverted the river and had a whole group of men come down that riverbed, climbed up onto the bridge, ran to the gates, opened all the gates, and literally without virtually any casualties, they went to bed, Babylon, and woke up Medo-Persia the next morning. And it became the Persian Empire that we know of. It's fantastic, and God told them it was going to happen. Remember he said to Nebuchadnezzar, the hand wrote on the wall, Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, you've been weighed in the balance and found lacking. That's what happened. Our God is an awesome God. During this time, Israel and Judah just were either still had stayed in the Babylonian Empire or had come back, and this is when the temple was rebuilt. I believe it was 516 BC. Remember, Cyrus let them go back, helped them to rebuild the temple. And so they had a temple and they had their nation, but they were never the same. And for what it's worth, because they went into captivity, they were so terrified then of displeasing God, the people that wanted to live for God. That's when all the legalism of the Pharisees that Jesus encountered started growing. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And that's when they stopped writing Yahweh's name, because they said, we don't want to take his name in vain. So they started calling him the Lord instead of Yahweh. And so in all of our Bibles, we don't have the name of God, which is Yahweh, or Yahweh, or Yahweh, or Yahweh. All these lovely arguments over. Can you imagine? We just go down the same silly road of legalistic, like that's going to make a difference. You should never say Jesus, only Yeshua. I got saved and filled with the Holy Spirit, and I said Jesus. So I'm sorry, I love the saying, he that has an experience is not at the mercy of him that only has an argument. So you're too late. So this is when Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther, remember Esther was in the Persian kingdom, and that's when Haman wanted to destroy them. Remember that? And guess what it calls Haman? God's word is so fantastic. He was called Haman the Agagite. The Agag, King Agag. Remember when they came out of Egypt and were going to the promised land? And what was the nation that Agag was king over? Amalek. Kathleen, would you give David a free lunch? Would you write a check for him? I should have candy bars up here. And what did God say about Amalek? I will have war with them forever. I think Esther's the coolest story in history, frankly, just as a story. But it's loaded with truth. All the way down there, the Amalekites wanted to destroy Israel in the Persian Empire, and God turned it all the way around and let the Israelites destroy the Amalekites. Our God is an awesome. He reigns, he rules. Okay. Hurrying along. Okay. And then 200 BC to 4 BC, when Christ was born, the best guess, about 4 BC, there were no kings in Israel or Judah. They were living under the Greek rule, Ptolemy, Seleucid kingdoms. Remember Antiochus Epiphanes? Some of you know about him. He was a Greek ruler over Palestine, and he made them kill pigs in the temple and smeared pig's blood in the temple. He was evil. And they were groaning. Horrible time. No prophets. Nothing spiritually. It's called the silent years. Not much going on. Kind of like the Dark Ages. But then John the Baptist pops up. God always raises up someone even in the darkest times. And so no more Old Testament books were written then. That's not technically true. The 4 Gospels were actually, do you know Jesus lived under the Old Covenant? A lot of people don't know that. Even though those books are in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John show us life still under the Old Covenant. Christ had not died. There was no new covenant yet. So technically, you could say those books were Old Testament books. But oh, what a change. Now, just to recap, there were 12 tribes of Israel. This is something a lot of people don't know. Jacob remember, he worked for his father-in-law for 7 years so he could marry Rachel that he was in love with. And what did his father-in-law do? What did Laman do? What was his name? My mind just went blank. What was his father-in-law's name? Laman. Oh, it sounded wrong. Close enough. Remember, Jacob loved Rachel, but guess what? She couldn't have any babies. She was barren. Most of the sons of Israel were not Rachel's children. See up there? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah were birthed from Leah, Jacob's first wife, because his father-in-law tricked him. He knew he wanted to marry Rachel. And after 7 years, he goes, I was just kidding. You don't get the bonus prize, you get the runner-up. And he had to work another 7 years. And then Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were born from handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. How come you guys didn't name your daughters that? Look at this. There's not one son of tribe of Israel from Rachel yet. And then Issachar and Zebulun back to Leah. The only two sons of Jacob that were from Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. Why do you think there may have been some natural antagonism between Joseph and his brothers? Remember, they wanted to kill him and they sold him into slavery because he was the first son of the loved wife. And so he was more special to Jacob. And so was Benjamin. So that's how Israel got started. Now the northern house, again, formed after Israel was divided. House of Israel, 10 tribes. And the northern house, Israel, which is also called different names, the 10 tribes. Sometimes it's just called Manasseh. They never had a godly king after the nation split. Not one. Every king in Israel was ungodly, idolatrous, evil, like Ahab and company. The southern Judah, which also did include half of the tribe of Levi, there were Levites that stayed with that part during the split. And some godly kings were part of Judah. Remember Hezekiah, they'd have a great revival, and Josiah, and they had a few godly kings. Some of them were a mixed bag. Some of them were very godly, and near the end of their life, they turned away from God somewhat. Interesting, each one is an interesting story. There was one ruling non-king, Athaliah. Remember, she was evil. She tried to kill all the sons. And she ruled in Israel for 7 years and almost wiped out the seed of David. But they hid Josiah as a little boy until they could kill her, rid the kingdom of her, and then they placed him as a 9-year-old, I believe, as king of Judah. Only had one dynasty, the seed of David. Israel had 9, I think. Thought it was written here, but it's okay. Oh, there it is. Yeah, they had 9 dynasties. Every king was so wicked, their people were so sick of them, they'd end up with a whole different family ruling. Let me just say it this way. Look at our nation. Do you think Biden is going to have a dynasty? Trump, hated to the hilt. Not going to be any dynasty. I mean, if these were kings, I think you get the point. Israel remained a kingdom 254 years, Judah 389. Why so much trouble? And we're almost done. The Bible contains two messages to Israel and Judah. One, I am going to judge you. I'm going to wipe you out. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to divorce you. God uses that language. He used the analogy. You were to be married to me spiritually. And you are, God doesn't mince words. He said, you are a whore. You're sleeping around with all of your idols, Baal, Moloch. And he said, you're so weird. This is what God said. In the normal prostitution world, men come and pay the prostitute. He said, you are so rebellious against me, you actually go and pay your lovers to come to you. You offer your sons in the fire to these false lovers. And you give them what I've given you as gifts, you give them to them. God does not mince words. And in many of the books, almost all of them, you'll see, if you don't turn, I'm going to do this, 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 it's not going to be good. But if you will, then I'll restore you. I'll bring you back. I'll show you mercy. Side by side. That's how God is. That's how God has dealt with you and I. Why do we go through tests and trials? Because we're not congruent with God in ways in our lives. So he lets little trials, then bigger trials, then really scary trials if we just keep persisting. Why? Because he's mean? No, because he wants us to have the highest and the best in our life. And the highest and best is when we're in agreement with him. Because he made us. He's not silly. He knows what works. But probably there aren't that many verses where God warned them. I don't think. Leviticus, there's a whole long passage. God says, if you don't turn, I'm going to do this. You're going to have terror, famine. You're going to lose your nation. I'm going to scatter you. The land will be desolate. But if you turn, I'll show you mercy. These are just a few verses. I will set my face against you, and you'll be struck down before your enemies. Those who hate you are going to rule over you, and you'll flee even when no one's pursuing. You're going to lose all your confidence as a nation. That reminds me of a nation I've heard of. Is it the United States? I think so. I'll lay your cities waste. You ever driven through Detroit lately? Baltimore? There's a stunning two pictures. One is Detroit at the end of World War II, a gleaming, beautiful city. The other is Hiroshima, leveled. And then there's pictures taken today. Detroit looks like a wasteland, desolate, so depressing. Buildings destroyed, and Hiroshima's this beautiful city. It's really hard to look at. I myself will devastate your land. Your sanctuaries will be desolate. I'll scatter you. He wasn't vague. He wasn't like, hey, things could get a little hard. No, I'm going to do this, and this. Remember? Joshua read, and Moses read the covenant to them. If you follow it, I'm going to bless you, bless you, bless you, bless you. But you know what's sad and ironic? There's this much blessings promised and almost exactly twice as many curses promised if you don't obey me. Why? Because God knew how rebellious they were going to be. hear the book of the law. I'll bless you going out, coming in. You'll rule over your enemies. They'll attack you one way and flee 10 ways. Then, but if you don't, your enemies will attack you and you will flee 10 ways. You won't have crops. You'll have mold. You'll have diseases. You'll have locusts. And he read them and said, here, listen, pleading with them. Deuteronomy, I'll hide my face. Judgment, 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 judgment. Here's Jeremiah trying to reason with the king. By the way, there's a very, he's not well known, an amazing artist. It's a guy named Jamie Hansen. He created these pictures, I just want you to know, with the help of his friend named Chap. Here's Jeremiah. Please, look at what happened to Israel. I'm begging you, turn to God. And they're laughing and mocking him, throwing him down in a dungeon. Destruction, warning, 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 warning. I mean, the red light is flashing. You are in trouble. Manasseh, all the sins that he brought the people into. And what happened? God did exactly what he promised. Here's just a few more verses. You know, we don't think about the Psalms talking about this. Many of the Psalms are during or after the captivity were written. That's quite a few verses, isn't it? Well, there's at least 38 more that I've found where God promised judgment. Some of them are big, long passages, not just a verse. I'm divorcing you. I don't want you around anymore. You don't love me. I've given you everything. And that's how I feel about America. We don't want you in our classrooms, our health care, our politics, our finances, our churches in many ways. We don't want you around. And then 9/11 hits and it's like, why are you being so mean? We're so blind, exactly like Israel. Hosea 1, if you've never read Hosea recently, read it again with all of this in mind. The first chapter, God says, he says, name them Lo Ruhamah and Lo Ami. You are not my people and I'm not giving you any mercy. I'm going to wipe you out. And I mean, he is brutal. There's no faithfulness, no steadfast love from you. I'm rejecting you. But then, it's like God can't help himself. And he says in 9:17, I'm rejecting you. You won't listen. You're going to wander. But he's so full of mercy. In the same chapter, he says, yet the number of the children of Israel are going to end up like the sand of the sea. Can't be measured. In the place where I've said to you, you are not my people, it's going to later be said, you are children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel will be gathered together under one head. It's a prophecy of Christ. God is going to restore, at the end of the age, the whole house of Israel. Well, where are they? God knows. And that's another topic we're going to teach on sometime. Fascinating. If you break my covenant, okay, listen to this. There are many, many churches teaching what's called replacement theology. Israel was God's people, but after this, he broke the covenant and they will never be his people again. He's replaced Israel with the church. Many churches teach that. That's a lie. But next week, we're going to look at some shocking things that the church, I believe, has very wrong, and we need to have a right perspective still. But let's see if this is very vague. Thus says Yahweh, if you can break my covenant with the day, when the sun comes up, and my covenant with the night, so that the day and night will not come at their appointed times, then also my covenant with David, my servant, could be broken. Does that sound likely? Are we still having day and night? Then he's not broken his covenant with Israel. Jeremiah, thus says Yahweh, if I have not established my covenant with day and night and the fixed order of heaven and earth, the seasons, weather, everything, then I will reject the offspring of Jacob. God says, unless I change the whole earth and nothing works, I'm still in covenant with Israel. Now, what we're going to talk about next week is what is the current position of Israel and the covenant. And I believe many people have complete wrong understanding. He says, even if you're scattered amongst the nations, I bring all the curses on you, I'll still restore you. If you confess your iniquity or sin, even if you're in the land of your enemies, I won't cast you away to utterly destroy and break my covenant with them. For I am Yahweh. I will, for their sake, remember the covenant I made with their forefathers, Abraham, David. Says it again in Deuteronomy. This is not vague. This is very clear. God is not going to break his covenant with the Abrahamic descendants and the descendants of Jacob. New Testament. Has God rejected his people? Look at verse 2. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. No. But they've been broken off. They stumbled. And through their trespass, God opened the door to the Gentiles. How much more when he brings back Israel and the Gentiles all as one under him? He says it's going to be awesome. What if some of the branches were broken off? You're a wild branch, the Gentiles. You're grafted back in. Don't get arrogant against Israel and say they're stupid and they're gone. No. They were broken off so you could be grafted in. And they were broken off because of unbelief. You were grafted in by faith, provided you continue in confidence. This was a hard one to get Chat to understand what I was trying to do. See the big branch laying there? That was good. But boy, getting them to understand grafting didn't. It is what it is. That's the Gentiles being grafted into the olive tree. What does this do? It gives us a major understanding. You know what? I'm going to save this for next week. Except to say, I love this. I love this. When I started trying to make it, I got so emotionally impacted. It says Jesus broke down the wall that separated the Jews and the Gentiles. Jesus broke it down. There's no more wall. Tentative, wasn't easy, Jews, Gentiles, but eventually. Isn't that good? Woo! So that's the nutshell history of Israel, and it's the foundation for next week. Don't miss it, man. You'll be so sad if you miss it. Okay. Thank you guys for patience, letting me get that all out in one shot.